Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home.
Hello, Karen.
Hey, Dan.
And what a busy August it has been.
Oh my goodness gracious. Yes, it's been crazy busy. And just so our listeners know, Dan is in a new office and he's waiting for his furniture to arrive. So he's going to be a little echoey today.
And I don't know if it'll help with the new furniture, but we'll make do. We'll see what we can do, and you got to adapt to new changes, right?
Yeah, but let everyone know where your new office is so they can find you.
Oh, absolutely. So we are at the fairgrounds now. It's nice being out here. There's a lot of room. There's a lot of potential to do things out here. Buildings, the facilities are really nice. We have some nice conference rooms to do some good programs with, and we thank the commissioners and the fair board for helping out and getting us in this new building.
And that's fantastic. I have to admit, I'm a little bit jealous about having space to do stuff.
Well,
But
and you're in downtown Wheeling, so
yeah,
it's a whole different look.
it is. But we're a more urban county, so yeah, I get it too. So we just got back from our national conference down in Texas, and it was hot and dry down there, and it's hot and dry up here.
It is hot and dry. I also went on vacation at the beginning of August and was already drought conditions. And I come back thinking, well, as I'm leaving, we're supposed to get some rain and everything like that. So
Right.
I checked the rain gauge, and I think we were below 3 inches before I left, which would have been actually I recorded from June to the end of July. We were, if I'm not mistaken, just below 3 inches, and we got an inch like in the past 2-3 weeks. And
Yeah.
we're still in that D2 classification from USDA. The forage is growing very, very slow, and all kinds of crops are going to be hurting with this drought.
So we over here are in D1, which is moderate drought. D2 is severe, but we do have several places in the state that have experienced extreme drought. Thankfully, nowhere in West Virginia have gotten to the exceptional drought stage, which is super bad. But it's still very difficult to deal with these moderate to extreme drought conditions.
That's right. So when we look at the U.S. drought monitors, there's abnormally dry, which is D0, which we're beyond that. There's moderate dry, which is D1. Severe is D2, and most of Belmont County is in D2. Ohio, it seems like the southeast area is in that D2 range. I think the northwest is in no drought at all. So Ohio's very split, and not only as far as what grows and what are the dominant crops in the state, but also in drought conditions. It looks like we're hurting down here, but they're just fine up in the northwest. It seems they're swimming around in their fields. Actually, no, I shouldn't joke about that, because they've had some very severe weather up there. And this discrepancy is just, it's something that we've talked about in the past, and it's something that we have to get used to. We either get very, very little, or when we do get rain, they're very, very high impact, severe storms that are typically above 2 inches. So it's just the way things have changed.
Yeah.
With climate and what we have to deal with now. The reasons for that is talked about, and and people have different ideas, but the reality is we have to live with it.
Yeah, and you talked about severe storms. We also went on vacation and we were camping, and that big storm came up and dropped some hail on us. And I've never had hail while camping before. That was pretty intense.
Oh, wow. Glad you brought that up, because those severe storms that they had in the northwestern part of the state, even not honestly, I think Worcester had a pretty severe storm as well last week, and they had some hail. Hail comes along with the severe weather as well. It's not all rain, and hail can cause a lot of damage.
Yeah. And a lot of these storms have spurred tornadoes too. So, West Virginia's had more tornadoes in the past year than it has in the past 10 years. So, it's really crazy the weather switches that are happening. When I first moved to West Virginia to go to college, I used to hear the sirens go off and I would be like, "Oh, shoot, we got to get to the basement" because I grew up in Cincinnati. And they're like, "No, that's just the volunteer fire department." I'm like, "What?" So, because that was the start when you heard the siren, that was a tornado warning, and you had to go get safe, right? But that's not what they use them for in West Virginia. So maybe it'll switch, I don't know.
Well, yeah, let's hope not, though, right?
Yeah, let's hope we don't get so many tornadoes that they do adopt that, right? All right, so let's move on to what we can do right now. Like, what do you do when you have no rain, especially if you're growing some alternative crops or non hay crops, right? Because we've talked about hay and drought before. So we want to talk about the non hay crops. And so we're going to start with the biggest non hay crop, which is corn. Because a lot of our growers will grow corn, not just for sweet corn, but also for animal feed for the wintertime.
In general, corn is one of the leading crops in the state. Corn can is suited for some drought, but it can be severely impacted by conditions that we're currently in, especially right now. If you look at corn, as far as how much rain is necessary per day for corn to be at its best, you're looking at zero point 0.2 inches per day early on, which translates to, normally we say about an inch a week, which is kind of just under that. But we're not getting nearly an inch a week. In fact, once you start to get to tasseling and silking, and even the milking, the blister and the milking stage of the corn, when the kernels are forming, that's when it needs the most water. And you're really looking at 1.5 to 2 inches of rain a week, of water a week. So right now is when I'm seeing all the corn tasseling and silking, and it is so dry right now. So I think corn's going to be pretty impacted, especially on the southeast portion of the state. On a northwest side of the state, like I was saying, they're getting a lot of rain, but they can have hail damage as well. So they're dealing with other issues. We can't just have a nice 1 inch rain event a week and everyone's going to be happy. It seems to be like either everything or nothing. But corn doesn't really rebound very well from drought conditions. And you start to lose yields, especially at this tasseling and soaking stage of the corn. And it's kind of what we're seeing right now. The corn's been in tassel for maybe 2 weeks now. Some people got theirs even earlier, so earlier than that, and it really hasn't had much rain. So the pollination is not going to be affected, but the development of the corn will be impacted. And corn doesn't typically recover as well as some other crops do.
Right, because the way corn works is each of those little tassels has to get some pollen on it, right?
That's right. So
And
each silk
yes, that's
receives
what I
a
meant.
pollen kernel, or a pollen grain, and it forms the kernel.
Right, and if that one silk doesn't get that pollen grain, then, because the tassel isn't making enough pollen because it'll decrease the amount of pollen it makes when it's dry, right? And
Right.
so you're gonna have less pollination, so you're gonna have unfilled heads of your corn, and it's not gonna be as nutritious, and it's not gonna be as pretty for those of you who are selling to humans.
Right. And in plants, much like animals, they want to survive. I guess it changes a little bit with annual versus perennial plants, but in general, reproduction is usually impacted pretty hard by drought. You can make the argument that in annual crops it's less impacted, but if the silks dry up, then that pollination event's not going to happen. You're not going to get good cob fill, and you're going to have corn ears that are incomplete. So it's just kind of what happens when you have a drought. Not only that, but the corn doesn't grow as well. Photosynthesis is decreased, and your yields are going to be lower, and nobody wants that.
Right. And so, if you have the ability, you can irrigate your corn, but a lot of producers don't have that ability. And so we lean more towards prevention in those cases where you are practicing maybe some no till, where there's some sort of a coverage on the soil. Because by covering the soil, you can decrease the temperature on the soil, and B, the evaporation that comes from that soil. So those two things work together to help keep moisture in the soil where the roots of the plants can get it. So mulching, putting something on the soil, leaving your residue on the soil, all of those things can help in these types of drought conditions.
Right. And like you were saying, corn is usually multiple acres. It's not hard to leave residue and no-till plant into corn, which is kind of what we're talking about. That would be more of an organic type mulch that would not leave the soil bare. When we talk about that, we usually discuss it in terms of erosion, but in this case, that is also a good insulator for moisture. It keeps the moisture in, doesn't allow the cracking to happen as quickly. And even the mulch will retain some of that moisture and release it into the soil at a different rate as opposed to just evaporate quickly into the atmosphere. So leaving residue in times like these could make a big difference, but it works just the same in specialty crops as well.
That's right. And, transitioning into those smaller specialty crops, a lot of our growers utilize black plastic mulch to just speed the whole system, right? Because you can lay it with a tractor and you poke your holes in it, put your crops in it. It keeps the weeds down. You put your drip lines underneath it so it traps the water next to the plant. But one of the things you also need to remember is when we have those really high temperatures in the 90s and hundreds, then that black mulch is also attracting that heat and it can drastically increase the temperature of the soil underneath the mulch. So, for instance, the effects of the different types of mulches, if you have an ambient temperature of 93 degrees, let's say, okay, um, and you want to measure the temperature of the soil to a 1 inch depth, your tall pasture is going to be about 10 degrees cooler. So that's 8 to 10 inches of forage on that pasture. It's going to be about 10 degrees cooler in the soil, which is going to make your roots much happier. If you have a mulched veggie bed, say you've mulched it with straw, it's going to be 90. So a little bit cooler, but definitely not warmer. Whereas if you're looking at black plastic, your temperature is going to skyrocket up to 128 in that soil. That's going to make your roots really unhappy and can reduce the ability of those roots to survive. Bare soil is 115 degrees. So that's not much better than that black plastic. But that overgrazed pasture, let's say you're down to 1 inch or less, then you're looking at 108. Again, all of those 100-degree temperatures are going to slow down the ability of that plant to create whatever leaves we want to use for either food or to get sugars into the fruits that those plants are producing. So reducing the temperature of the soil is going to really increase the ability of your plants to produce. So, some of the things we're seeing is smaller fruits. We're seeing fewer fruits. Trees are dropping things, leaves are cupping and slowing down their photosynthesis. So, the fruits are going to be less sweet. So, there are a lot of implications that come from higher soil temperatures.
And there is a role for black plastic. I mean, it's not all negative because with black
Oh,
plastic,
yeah, for
you
sure.
can you can start your things earlier. When we do a show in April, we talk about the temperature of the soil not being suited to start planting. With black plastic, as Karen was saying, you can accelerate that, but obviously there is a drawback, and those are the extreme temperatures. And these are strategies that we pick. You can get earlier planting with black plastic, but if you were to cover that plastic now with some kind of organic wood mulch, let's say, or straw, you can keep that temperature from getting too high and start damaging the roots. When we talk about July and August temperatures, especially this year, it's been very, very hot. So hot that the grass actually went dormant early.
It did.
Not so much because of the rain, even though we didn't get too much rain, but because of the temperatures. A lot of the cool season grasses will go dormant when the temperatures start getting into the 90s. But what we're seeing now is the temperature has come down some, but now it's very dry. So I've seen some of the forages kind of break the dormancy, but not really grow very well because there's no water available.
Right. And so for those farmers who diversified their pasture fields and created a warm season grass field, they're really benefiting from looking ahead because they are able to still graze in that warm season grass field, which is a grass that's more able to deal with these higher temperatures. And so this is one of those reasons, you may think, oh, my cool season grass is doing fine. It's not a problem. Well, this is a pretty significant dry period you weren't planning on having. You don't hope for an emergency or a disaster, but you can plan for it, right?
Yeah, have good mitigation pastures in this case, or mitigation plans in place to just kind of help with issues. The the summer slump with cool season forages isn't a novel concept, but I would say in the past few years we really haven't seen it affect too much the cool season grasses, at least in eastern Ohio. But this year is even though it's abnormally dry, it seems like more of a historic summer, hot, dry temperatures that will cause more of a noticeable summer slump as opposed to the previous 5 years where I think it's been a little bit more mild. I don't remember the extreme heat as much in the past few years as I do this year. But again, it's summer. And historically, these temperatures, even though some days have broken records, sometimes it's just what it is. And maybe we've been a little bit off the norm in the past 5 years.
Right. I think the biggest issue this summer is the length of time for this extreme weather. So it's been hotter longer, it's been drier longer, and the length of time really impacts things. Like, for instance, when you look at trees that are struggling now and you're starting to see those leaves cupping up in your orchards or seeing fruit drop, you need to get out there and get some extra mulch on the ground to preserve any moisture that's there because the root decline that's happening right now will stick with those trees for years to come. So
Mhm.
it's going to take time for trees to start regrowing those roots again. So if you have a yard tree that's a super treasure for you, make sure you're getting out there and getting that 5-gallon bucket with the holes drilled in the bottom or a drip line out there and irrigate those trees occasionally. You don't have to do it like every day or anything, but at least once every week or two during this dry period to give them a little bit of extra love because in those urban and suburban environments, they have a lot of extra stressors. In the woodland environment, they have a nice 7-inch layer of duff on the soil floor, which mitigates moisture loss in a significant way. So, they maintain their own humidity and moisture control in the forest. They have a design and a system for that. But in those urban and suburban environments and in orchards, we take that natural duff layer away. We don't have 7 inches of rotting leaves on the ground in our yards, right? If we did, the city would come in and tell us to clean up our yard.
And, yeah, and they have shade, and they have that big old canopy too.
That's right, that's right. And so it's really important when you're looking at your trees in a non-native environment, especially in orchards where you have more tractors going through, potentially more soil compaction. You want to reduce your soil compaction as much as possible and consider looking into an irrigation system in those orchards, at least for the dry season. Now, there is some funding help available for farms. I encourage you to reach out to your local FSA office. We don't really have time to go into all of the funding assistance that is out there, but I do need you to know that there is funding assistance for farms through the FSA. So reach out to your local FSA office and tell them what your struggles are. The more we know about what you're going through, the better we can create assistance programs to help you through that. So, like, I had one farmer reach out to me saying that he's planning to sell out. He normally overwinters his cattle. He's selling them at now because he doesn't have enough forage to maintain them for the length of time he typically does. So he's not going to feed them out. So he's getting a lower income from them than he was expecting. And so those types of things you have to let us know about because then we can report that information because every week we provide this total information of our region to a statistical service that then they take that data and create assistance programs. So we need to know, are you having to irrigate more? Has your water bill quadrupled? Do you need assistance getting water to your animals? Do you need to hook up to the city system? Or do you need a tank to go fill up and bring it out to your pastures because you've had to move the cattle further away from water? There are assistance programs out there. So for crop losses, for livestock, just make sure you're reaching out to your local service providers and let them know your struggles so that way we can help you. And we do have some guidance we can give you. Don't keep it to yourself, because when you keep it to yourself, that's when you start getting overwhelmed. And, if you're starting to have feelings of overwhelming anxiety, you're constantly worrying about being able to make the ends meet because you lost this crop or anything else, if you're having trouble sleeping or other depression like symptoms, or you're arguing more at home, if you have any health concerns related to dust or low water flow, poor air quality, poor water quality, or if you have financial concerns, these are common reactions. A lot of people are going through this, but you don't have to go through this alone. So you can reach out to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. There's a disaster distress helpline that you can reach out to. It's available 24/7. It's multilingual, and they're there to help you get through the emotional distress associated with these drought conditions. So you can call or text 1-800-985-5990. That's 1-800-985-5990. And they can help you work through some of the emotional stress that comes with this. And I do encourage you to reach out to someone and talk about how stressed you're feeling.
That's very important. Thank you, Karen. Yeah, this is a D2 drought, so we are seeing impacts on our crops. Unfortunately, farming is a tough game. Sometimes you do really well, and sometimes you don't, and then there are struggles. Perspective is really important in this case, and you have to think about the long term picture of your decisions. And
There's always hope, and we don't want to lose that.
right.
But to get back, we forgot to talk about one thing that's really important in irrigation, and I want to talk about it before we run out of time today. And that is to make sure your irrigation is functioning properly. You are making sure you don't have any weird leaks or your pump is running strongly. But one of the best things you can do is to just buy a soil hygrometer. This is a little tool that can be as cheap as $14 or as expensive as $500, depending on how you're going to use it. And you can just stick it in the soil to the depth that the roots are growing. So, different crops, different root depths, right? Your carrots are going to be a little lower than your lettuce, and measure the soil moisture and make sure it is in the green zone, that it is a adequate soil moisture, and that you're running your irrigation system long enough to get the water where it needs to go, but not so long that it is overwatering. So what you definitely don't want is, you don't want your plants to go from super wet to super dry to super wet to super dry. You want them to be just wet enough to be happy and stay there. So monitoring your irrigation, not over irrigating, is going to be critical to keeping your plants healthy and to not experience the effects of dry conditions on your crops.
And one other thing, we're talking about irrigating fertilizers. A lot of times, when you see your crop not doing so good, you want to put fertilizer down. But in a drought condition, I don't recommend fertilizer. The plant is just trying to maintain its homeostasis. It's just trying to survive the drought. Fertilizer, sometimes it comes in salt forms. It stimulates the plant when the resources aren't there to maintain that growth rate. So try to avoid fertilizers when we are in drought conditions or stressful conditions.
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing is the moisture. And if you're missing that component, adding fertilizer is not going to solve your problem.
Add some mulch.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, mulch is better than adding fertilizer. If you're on a regular fertilizer schedule, let's say you've got it scheduled to go through your drip tape and your high tunnel or whatever, then you can stick to that. We're not saying no fertilizer at all during this time, but
but if your plants are dry, no fertilizer.
yeah, if your plants are drooping or wilting, I would avoid fertilizer right now. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. So to wrap up, remember, keep the lines of communication open. We're all going through this together, and we can't help you if we don't know what struggles you're going through. So please reach out to your service providers, share what you're going through, talk to other people who are struggling as well. Take care of your crops. Make sure you're adding a little extra mulch. Going a little deeper in your mulch right now. If you have a 2-inch layer of mulch, double it. Give it to 4 inches. That's not gonna hurt your plants, but don't, like, throw mulch on top of your plants, obviously. But, when you're harvesting, also recognize what's coming up. We're having a lot of blossom end rot right now because of the dry period followed by a rainfall. So if you're experiencing that, know that just showering your tomatoes with calcium isn't necessarily gonna fix that problem. It's the water imbalance that the tomato is going through. It didn't have the proper water while it was being fertilized. It happened when the flower was still on the tomato. If you have forked carrots, advertise them as the drought special. Work on your marketing here. But yeah, make sure you're using your organic mulches, and putting some straw down on top of that black mulch could be helpful right now, just to reduce that temperature, especially when it spikes back up again later this summer. And make sure you're monitoring the health and efficiency of your irrigation system, that you are monitoring the soil moisture when you're irrigating and not just going on a basic timer, because there are some, as you go up a hill, you may have less water at the top of the hill than you have at the bottom of the hill. And there are systems to work with that. So if you do have a really steep slope that you're irrigating, there is drip tape that can help ameliorate that problem by putting more pressure in the upper end of the water, the tape.
Don't you just love technology? when it when
I
it when it
do, I
works.
do when it works. So, reach out, ask for help, and we'll be around. Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.